In 1990, this quiet beach was transformed into a war zone. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, prompting a coalition of countries to combine forces to expel his army. Iraq had over 500,000 frontline troops with another million in reserve, armed with a formidable array of Soviet weapons, including 5,000 tanks. The USAF had an aircraft in their inventory designed specifically to obliterate Soviet armor and provide the much-needed support for the coalition ground forces, the A-10. Curiously, General Horner, commander of air operations, almost left it behind.
General Horner was called in by General Schwarzkopf before the actual assault launch to review what airplanes were going to be there. With 1,900 airplanes to be assigned, 0 A-10s. And Schwarzkopf looks at the list and he says, "Where's my A-10s?" And General Horner says, we have F-16 specially armed. They'll do the job." Schwarzkopf looks at it, says, "I don't want to hear any of your Air Force political bullshit. Give me my A-10s."
The A-10s, aircraft that were at the time 20 years old, managed to outshine the 1,900 aircraft that had been chosen ahead of them, destroying 4,000 tactical targets, a tally higher than all the others combined. With such an impressive performance, why was the USAF so reluctant to bring the Warthog to war? What was it about this tank-busting machine that repulsed them so much? To understand the mystery of the A-10, we have to look back to the origins of the USAF. In World War I and II, the Air Force had been a branch of the U.S. Army. Over time, the role of the Air Force evolved with improved technology and battlefield experience. Aircraft could provide vital aerial intelligence, drop bombs on strategic targets, and move troops and equipment. One of the Air Force's most important jobs was providing close support for troops on the ground. That is, working closely with soldiers on the battlefield and executing the difficult mission of destroying enemy forces without causing casualties to nearby friendlies. As important as this mission was to the overall success of military campaigns, it was despised by many Air Force generals of the day.
From the day one, the United States Air Force going all the way back to the Army Air Corps, there has been this antipathy to the mission called close air support because it is tied to the Army or ground warfare. And it was a mission that did not fit their view of them being able to independently carry out whatever war that they wanted to and not be tied to what was going on the ground, not be tied to another service.
They very early on decided that what they needed to do to get a decent budget was to emphasize that bombing could win wars. That idea, a very false notion, by the way, still runs the Air Force today. They thought they could get much more money if they built bigger and fancier airplanes like bombers, and if they put out a tremendous amount of propaganda that bombers by themselves could win wars.
As much as the Air Force resented and resisted the close support mission, it was a necessary evil. Time and again, bombing alone proved ineffective at breaking the will of the people, whether it was Germany's blitz of Britain or endless bombing raids of the Allies against German targets. Allied ground forces supported by aircraft had the dirty job of taking back Europe mile by mile. Soldiers often found themselves mired in the quicksand of war, the situation shifting from minute to minute. They needed pilots tuned into the chaos of battle.
Infantry working outside the wire on a patrol, they want something above them that can see all, communicate with them, help them with their navigation problems, help them see ahead And so they won't be surprised. And if they do get surprised and they come in contact, they can get almost immediate fire on the target. By immediate, I mean within a minute.
As much as the Air Force wanted to focus on bombing missions, they still managed to produce some legendary close-support aircraft, albeit by blind luck.
The P-47, which was the original Thunderbolt, that airplane turned out to be a close-support airplane totally by accident, which is typical of the Air Force. Since the Air Force didn't care to do close support, obviously they weren't going to design airplanes for it. They designed the P-47 as their approach to the greatest thing in the sky, to shoot down Messerschmitts. In fact, it was not the greatest thing in the sky to shoot down Messerschmitts. It racked up a very good combat record in air-to-air combat because it had some, fabulously good pilots, which count far more than airplanes. By pure accident, it turned out it was a wonderful close support machine because it had a huge radial cast iron engine right in front of the pilot, which was like built-in armor for him from the front. Could carry a big load because it was a big airplane, too big to be a good air-to-air fighter. And the engine was very survivable because it didn't have a liquid-cooled engine and radiator. So basically, rifle bullets couldn't bring it down very easily. The P-47 could come home with, 20 or 30 holes in it. And so it racked up a terrific record.
Close support was not considered the most glamorous job, but it was a vital one. The pilots of the 365th Fighter Group, also known as the Hellhawks, flew their P-47 Thunderbolts in one of the most important operations of the war.
It was realized in the Allied headquarters that they needed a tactical air force to support the ground troops directly during the process of the invasion of Normandy. So they needed a dedicated fleet of aircraft, both bombers, transport, and fighters, to seize control of the air and then support the ground troops. So the Hellhawks got drafted, probably not by choice, into that role. They dreamed of themselves as the high-flying pilots with a scarf streaming behind their neck, but they began to realize that they could play a crucial role on the battlefield, and they became very connected emotionally with the GIs on the ground and helping them out.
The Thunderbolt's impact would last long after World War II. The aircraft's success would set the mold for all future close support missions.
The importance of the P-47 and Hellhawks and the way they use that airplane in combat is still with us today, 65 years later. Since World War II, with a few exceptions in Korea in the early days of that war, American ground troops have never fought without air superiority, without complete confidence that any aircraft they saw overhead was a friendly one. And that's a legacy of the P-47's ability to control the battlefield immediately over the front lines where the fighting was heaviest.
As the war came to the close, a new weapon emerged which changed warfare forever. The dropping of atomic bombs sealed the fate of Japan in World War II. It also seemed to solidify the position of bomber generals who believed that bombing could win wars alone. The U.S. Air Force was in a powerful position, as it was the only service capable of delivering a bomb, albeit one constructed with the Navy's oversight. Though the Army and Navy were not enthused about sharing their budgets with a young competitor, and slowed and sabotaged the process wherever they could not stop the inevitable. And on September 18, 1947, an independent United States Air Force was born. Though the Army and Air Force were separate entities, the Army relied on aircraft to operate, to transport troops and equipment, and for the vital mission of close support. In 1947, a document was hammered out between the armed services to divide up the roles and missions of their respective fleets of aircraft.
The Army and the Air Force had negotiated a set of unbelievably bad agreements. I mean, bad for the taxpayer and bad for the soldier, called the Key West Agreements, by which they agreed to divvy up air assets. The Army would be in control of all helicopters, and the Air Force would be in control of all fixed-wing airplanes. And the deal was that the Air Force would not object to the Army getting very large numbers of these, would not object to them, doing armed versions of them, and in return the Air Force promised, we'll give you lots of close support.
A young colonel, Avery Kay, took part in these negotiations. He was a highly decorated and respected officer, having navigated the lead B-17 in the Schweinfurt raids, a treacherous mission to cripple Germany's industrial might. Colonel K soon realized that navigating through the politics stemming from the inter-service rivalries was no easier.
He was probably one of the most ethical officers I've ever known, a guy of enormous character and courage, almost to the extent of naivete, being just naive about, about what bureaucratic chicanery is all about. He came to realize within a year or two after having served in these negotiations and written some of this language where the Air Force promised to deliver close support, he realized the Air Force had no intention of ever delivering that support. And out of conscience, he felt personally responsible and guilty that the Air Force had not delivered and that he had personally participated in the lie. And he dedicated the rest of his career to creating a close support airplane that would deliver on the promises that he had been part of.
In just a few years, the USAF's short-sightedness when it came to close support became blatantly obvious. The Korean War was not decided with an atomic bomb blast. It was a grueling conventional war. Here, the USAF pinned their hopes on their speedy new jet fighters. They may have been state-of-the-art, but they were too fast and without the range to be effective close support aircraft. P-51 Mustangs left over from World War II were taken out of storage and shipped over as a makeshift solution. These aging aircraft suffered heavy losses as their engines were vulnerable to ground fire. The Navy and Marines, with their A-1 Sky Raiders and F-4U Corsairs respectively, took the lion's share of the close support work, and they did so brilliantly.
Close support was of the essence, particularly when troops were moving, when we were moving forward or when the Chinese were pouring over the border and driving us back. The A-1 was in fact a wonderful workhorse, shared the virtues of the P-47, had a big rotary engine up front to protect the pilot, was very hard to shoot down, you could put lots of holes in it, and because it had been designed to pull really big loads off carriers, had a very big wing which allowed it to maneuver very well at low speed. That airplane did brilliant work, particularly in the hands of the Navy squadrons that had it.
The USAF seemed blind to the lessons learned in Korea and oblivious to the idea that there might be another conventional war. In the years that followed, they continued to focus on building nuclear-armed bombers and jets in preparation for an atomic war with the Soviets. The Army realized that they might have to take the close support mission into their own hands. Chuck Myers recalls Army tests he participated in at Fort Rucker.
A lot of guys in the Army, particularly on the aviation side, felt that the Navy and the Air Force were not going to provide them what they needed, which they referred to as organic air support. The only option they had was somehow try to figure out how to do it with helicopters. And that's what was going on at Fort Rucker, was experimenting with helicopters. They were reinventing our old Army Air Corps. My primary helicopter that I was using was an H-13. They had strapped 30 caliber machine guns to the rails.
When hostilities boiled over in a tiny country in Southeast Asia, the USAF once again found themselves unprepared.
Well, what happened in Vietnam is we went into Vietnam in the Air Force, in particular with aircraft that were not suitable for the situations that we encountered.
In the skies, the USAF needed agile dogfighters capable of keeping up with Soviet-made MiGs. Instead, they had aircraft built to drop atomic bombs and fighters that lacked the basic cannon for shooting down opponents at close range. In terms of close support, they were just as ill-equipped as they had been for the Korean campaign. The USAF were forced to use ancient Navy A-1 Sky Raiders to take up the slack.
In Vietnam, the great hero of the war was the A-1 again. And the A-1 by that time had been sent to the boneyard. The Navy didn't want to hear about it. And somebody in Special Forces had the sense to see, we need that airplane, and convinced Secretary McNamara to bring A-1s back out of the boneyard, refurbish them.
Not surprisingly, the Air Force were less than enthusiastic about having the Skyraider jammed down their throat by McNamara.
There was nothing that was more hated in the Air Force than to pull out a Navy airplane that had reciprocating engines, no jet, cruised at about 140 miles an hour, right? I mean, this was like anathema to the Air Force.
Though the Skyraiders were an unwelcome gift from the Navy, they proved themselves again, just as they had in Korea.
The A-1 was a very fine bombing platform, and we could get close to the target and be far more accurate than they could with an F-100 who had to go up, drop his bombs, and get back home quickly before it ran out of fuel.
It saved probably several hundred CIA camps in the jungle that were being overrun, at night by VC and some North Vietnamese regulars.
It would take ultimate damage. Bernie Fisher, who landed during the Battle of Bash Shaw and picked up a lad who had crashed just off the runway. He had, I forget what, 20 or 30 bullet holes through that thing.
While the USAF was trudging forward in Vietnam with the Skyraider, Colonel K, an advocate for close support aircraft, found himself in a new office with a clandestine mission.
Colonel Avery K. He wound up in 1966 in an office, a staff office to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the Pentagon headquarters called Concepts and Doctrine. Concepts and Doctrine was a smokescreen. What it really was about was a term of art in the military called roles and missions. What roles and missions means is your job is to defend the Air Force budget against raids by the Army and by the Navy.
At the time, the U.S. Army was in development of a costly new helicopter called the Cheyenne. It was built for the mission that the USAF detested, close support. 50% more than the Air Force's most expensive fighter, the F-4, K recognized that the Cheyenne was a threat to the Air Force's budget. He also saw an opportunity to leverage the situation to fulfill the Air Force's old promise to the Army.
He realized, if the Army does this, if the Army builds this super expensive $4.5 million helicopter, they're going to want 1,000 of them at least. Where's the money going to come from? It's going to come out of the Air Force budget. Perfectly correct perception. He also perceived that this would be a powerful incentive for the Chief of Staff to develop a close support airplane to make sure that the Army didn't get all that money.
K's plan of creating a close support aircraft to thwart the Cheyenne filtered its way up to the Chief of Staff of the time, John P. McConnell. Though McConnell was a bomber general and loathed the close support mission, he had fears about relinquishing it to the Army.
If you let the Army get away with that Cheyenne helicopter, that costs 50% more than our most expensive fighter, that money's going to come out of your hide, and you're going to go down in history as the Chief of Staff who gave up the close support mission. Of course, no Chief of Staff wants to do that. They're all very worried about their legacy. March on, start developing a close support airplane, make sure it's cheaper than the Cheyenne, and make sure it's much more lethal and much more survivable, so that we have a real case that the money should go to our airplane.
Given the green light to create the USAF's first purpose-built close support plane, Colonel K had to build the brain trust that would help shape the aircraft's specifications. At the time, Pierre Sprey was working for Secretary of Defense McNamara, analyzing the USAF's aircraft inventory in Europe.
I've been assigned to do, are we wasting our money on airplanes in Europe? Are we doing the right thing? Are we buying the right fighters to stop 90 or 100 divisions of Soviets from sweeping over Europe? That was the number one threat in the U.S. military strategy at that point. My conclusion was, we are wasting our money. We need to stop buying so many bombing airplanes. At that time it was called interdiction. We need to focus on close support, on actually helping our defending tank troops and anti-armor and so on with airplanes that can do the job right at the point of battle. That made me public enemy number one of the Air Force instantly.
Realizing he had found a like-minded maverick in Pierre Sprey, Colonel K approached him about joining his team.
He says, Mr. Sprey, I've read your paper. I see that you're a big supporter of close support and you think we should be spending lots more money on it. I've been assigned through my boss, and the Chief of Staff has approved, that we start a great close support airplane. He says, I'm stuck because the entire Air Force is sabotaging me. The rest of them don't want to do it, just the Chief of Staff. And we badly need help. We have no real technical people. Will you help us? There was no way in conscience that I could turn him down. It was such an absolutely correct thing to do and so badly needed. I said, I'll help you in any way I can.
To help Spray and Colonel K develop the ultimate close support aircraft, they enlisted the help of A-1 pilots fresh out of Vietnam. Their first-hand experience working with the Army would prove invaluable in creating the new aircraft, then simply known as AX. Tom Christie, who helped examine potential contenders for the AX's weaponry, recalls the passion of K's group.
And so I can remember coming up to Washington, TDY, from Eglin Air Force Base, which I did quite often, and meeting with Pierre Spray, 8 or 9 o'clock at night in the Pentagon, and I'd show up and he'd have 5 or 6 Air Force officers, that were part of this cabal. And one in particular that I remember was a guy by the name of Avery K. And they wanted to make sure that the Air Force did not go wandering off and make the same mistakes they'd made in previous years. They wanted an aircraft that was dedicated to and designed for close air support.
The interesting thing is, you would have imagined that an airplane born in this kind of sin, designed to simply kill an Army helicopter, couldn't possibly become a good airplane. But the interesting thing is, for us down in the trenches trying to shape this airplane, once we had the Chief of Staff's approval, is these were absolutely ideal circumstances for creating a really good airplane at very low cost. I mean, normally you're told include this technology, you got to include that radar, you got to include this piece of junk, make sure it's plenty expensive so that the contractors get lots of money. Whatever you do, don't make it cheaper than the last airplane. That's what really shapes airplanes today. We have the dead opposite, because our instructions were make the airplane much more lethal, much more obviously lethal than the Cheyenne helicopter, make it much cheaper, and make it much more survivable. That's exactly what you want to do for a close support airplane. So out of the political mayhem of the Pentagon budget battles, we actually had marching instructions that, the designers would kill for.
Pierre Spray, Tom Christie, and Chuck Myers all pushed for the development of America's first close support plane. In the 1970s, these renegades would bond into a group known as the Fighter Mafia. Together with other like-minded officers and defense analysts, they battled against the establishment to help create the best aircraft to meet the demands of war within the restraints of the government's purse. Though they had their critics, more often than not, the Fighter Mafia were proven to be right. Spray worked closely with contractors, including Northrop and Fairchild, and reviewed hundreds of designs in the quest to make the ultimate close support plane. But what exactly are the ingredients of such an aircraft?
The primary things you have to be able to maneuver very well at low speed, and that's both to get close to the target so you can distinguish friends from enemies, you can pick up things that the ground guys can't see, and very important, particularly since some of this focus was on Europe, you have to be able to fly under weather. When you've got clouds at 1,000 feet, 500-knot jets become hopeless. You have clouds at 1,000 feet and you have hills that are 500 feet high, and you try to come booming down through those clouds at 500 knots. That's simply not feasible.
The aircraft also needed to be capable of loitering over targets for extended periods, at least 2 and hopefully 4 hours with a full bomb load, 250 miles from base. If a plane had to leave the battle to refuel after just a few short minutes, it wouldn't be around long enough to provide any real support. The A-1 pilots were adamant about this, and about the need for an excellent radio communication system.
you had to have great communications. This was in a day, and by the way, the day extends to today, when essentially no Air Force airplane could talk to the ground. They had radios that deliberately could only talk to other Air Force airplanes or to headquarters or to Air Force radar airplanes, and no direct way to talk to a guy, you know, holding a small tactical radio sitting in a foxhole. My A-1 guys were so insistent on that, they just pounded it into me every day. You can give up anything else, don't give up those radios. That's how important they were.
Another key element of force support aircraft is survivability. Pilots going on such a treacherous mission, close to enemy fire, need to have a reasonable chance of coming back in one piece.
You can't ask pilots to go into an environment this dangerous to airplanes if you can't guarantee them that they're going to, you know, for the most part, get home. And so we put a huge amount of work into survivability.
There was so much attention paid to the aircraft being able to survive in what was forecast to be a very critical environment that we were going to be flying in with a lot of air defenses. In particular, the 23 millimeter gun system that the Soviets allegedly were fielding in great numbers.
You know, you put a .22 rifle into any modern jet, a .22 rifle bullet into any modern jet, and it will penetrate the tank, will very likely create a leak or light a fire, and the leak itself will catch on fire if it's right next to the engine.
Well, a lot of attention, unprecedented attention was paid to that whole concept of reducing the vulnerable areas. Being given a hit, will you go down or not?
A plethora of survivability specifications were laid out for the AX. Using cables rather than flammable hydraulics to control the flaps and other control surfaces, and building the structure of the aircraft the old-fashioned way, with spars covered by skin, a feature that allowed the old A-1s to return home with gaping holes in their wings. But perhaps the greatest feature of the AX was, of all things, a titanium bathtub.
We demanded armor, essentially completely around the pilot, certainly up to this level, from the front, the back, and everywhere, that would stop an American .50 caliber bullet or the Russian equivalent. And that led to a 2,000-pound titanium bathtub. They still call it the bathtub to this day, and the pilots love it because it gives them all kinds of confidence when they're pressing an attack and they're hearing impacts of bullets on the airplane and so on.
As important as survivability was, the AX was an offensive weapon, built to destroy tanks. The whole of the aircraft was designed around a massive gun capable of blowing away the competition. While designing the gun specs, Sprague looked for inspiration from a most unusual source, a hero of Nazi Germany.
During the Gulf War, an aircraft previously unwanted became the most valuable member of the American arsenal, the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II.
More than the publicity, the weapon system was really vindicated because it was a proof of concept that people that were associated with the airframe knew that it could do the job, but not a lot of other people did, especially some of the senior Air Force leadership. And it was very rewarding to go out and kick butt.
We probably took a lot of heat from all our friends in the Air Force and Navy and other airplanes because it's slow, it's ugly. You know, they like to rib us about that, but the reason it was so successful in the Gulf War is that look, it's not really about looks or about speed, it's about firepower. And the A-10 can really deliver a lot of ordnance in a very precise manner.
The A-10 basically is a gun that they decided to make fly.
The rate of fire of our gun is around 3,900 rounds per minute, or about 50 to 70 rounds per second as the gun comes up to speed. That does not sound like a machine gun. That sounds like a very unhappy lion or tiger or beast of some sort, because it has a roaring sound.
When the time came to name this intimidating airplane, only one beast came to mind.
Now, obviously, when the A-10 follows a long line of distinguished hogs, someone had to come up with a hog-like name for this airplane. And looking at it, the obvious hog-like name for an airplane that's this ugly would be the Warthog.
I think its mission of ground attack brought on some of that. You know, it's down and dirty in the mud, like a Warthog.
After its rousing success in the Gulf War, few remain unfamiliar with America's Warthog. During the war, Hog pilots flew 8,100 sorties, destroyed more than half of the Iraqi armor and artillery, assisted in search and rescue missions, hunted Scuds, and often operated in the darkness of night. The airplane's remarkable durability and the hard work of Air Force pilots and mechanics enable the Warthog to operate with a mission capability rate of an astonishing 96%. And in a tribute to its toughness, only 6 of the 144 Warthogs deployed to the Gulf were lost. The Warthog is one of the most formidable airplanes in the history of aviation. Although this highly maneuverable airplane can carry a remarkable 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance, it is the massive 30-millimeter Avenger cannon which places the Warthog in a class of its own. The Avenger can fire 70 rounds a second and is the largest gun ever put into a fighter airplane, capable of killing tanks, trains, boats, or anything else that gets in its way. With an impressive mixture of agility, rugged toughness, and devastating firepower, the A-10 stands as one of the world's great planes. In a sight becoming more common throughout the American military, a complementary mixture of full-time Air Force personnel and Air National Guardsmen combined to keep planes like the Warthog in a constant state of readiness.
Bob and I are both crew chiefs in the Maryland Air National Guard. Our unit's responsible for maintaining 17 A-10 aircraft. Bob's a full-time member of the Guard, and I'm a traditional Guardsman. When I'm not at the Guard on my one weekend a month, I'm a Baltimore City police officer. On a typical Saturday, we'll come in about 6:30 in the morning. I'll stay till about 6 o'clock at night. Usually we'll fly 10 airplanes to land again, send up 10 more. In the hangar right now, they have there's 4 airplanes in there. One they're using for load crew training. One, I believe they're doing some sort of flight control maintenance on. And the 2 in the far rear are both down for phase inspections.
This airplane right now is in the phase inspection, which is accomplished every 400 hours. Flying hours. It has come in for a major inspection. And during that inspection, they basically open the entire airplane up. And in doing that, they inspect front compartments. The gun gets inspection. The engines get inspected. The wings, the gears. You have special inspections that have to be done. TCTOs. And basically, it gets an overall look at everything. Okay, part of the A-10 and phase inspection process is the armors. They've taken this gun out and inspected the gun bay, and now they are in the process of preparing to put the gun back in.
Our primary function is to remain combat ready. In other words, to train to the same level of proficiency as our active duty counterparts, such that if the level of tasking and the level of involvement of our Air Force reached the point where it couldn't be completely handled by our active duty units, then the Guard and Reserve is ready to fill in on very short notice.
Usually on a drill weekend, or a UTA we call it, we put together a scenario for the day, a mini war for a day, and we have intel. We coordinate with intel and all the different shops, and we go out and basically execute a war plan for one day.
With the recent downsizing of the active duty Air Force, units like the 175th Wing of the Maryland Air National Guard have become integral participants in any mission undertaken by the Air Force. About 25% of the 175th Wing are full-time employees of the Maryland Air National Guard. The remaining members, traditional Guardsmen, leave their families and employers for training 1 weekend a month, and also to serve 15 days or more of active duty each year.
This is, of course, an Air National Guard unit made up of primarily prior service pilots that came out of active duty units and moved on to a civilian occupation. And in many cases, that civilian occupation was the airlines. And they fly 2 aircraft now. They have their civilian jobs with their civilian airlines, and they come in on weekends and some off times during the week to fly this airplane.
Amongst the proud and select group who call themselves hog pilots, one stands alone. Lieutenant Colonel Ron Henry, who's been flying the airplane since its introduction into the Air Force, is the only hog pilot to have amassed more than 4,000 hours of flight time in the A-10. Nicknamed the Professor for his academic and meticulous approach to his job, Henry's invaluable experience and insight have helped countless younger pilots master their craft.
I was a volunteer for this assignment back in 1977. The airplane was brand new. Every airplane that enters the inventory has a certain mystique associated with it. And in 1977, the A-10 was introduced at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, South Carolina. And the combination of Myrtle Beach Air Force Base and a brand new airframe made it the most desirable assignment in the United States Air Force in the late 70s. And there was no problem getting people to volunteer for this airplane. I can't understand why there ever would be. I have seen the airplane evolve over a period of 20 years. I started flying this airplane in 1977, and it's changed quite a bit. It was a very simple, austere airplane in its early days. It was designed that way, designed to cost very, very little. But the airplane has proved so survivable and so indestructible that the mission has evolved and the complexity of the airplane has increased over time. When we first started flying the airplane, we had basically 3 radios and a navigational receiver, and that's really all we had. We had no computers on board to help us guide the airplane or help us aim the weapons. Quite a bit of money has been spent on the airplane since its introduction to the fleet in terms of retrofitting the airplane. We now have a very capable air-to-ground computing system that helps us aim our weapons. It helps us aim not only the 30mm cannon, but also all the gravity weapons that fall off the bomb. Good enough to win the Air Force's biannual gunnery competition in 1991.
What I like most about the Guard is that we can just continue to fly as line pilots until we're 55 years old, an opportunity you usually don't have in the active duty. We enjoy flying, obviously, more than anything in our career, and that's why we joined the Guard.
Affection and enthusiasm for flying the Warthog makes the rigorous training seem less demanding than it is. Hog pilots can ill afford to be unprepared for the challenging missions the A-10 must perform, and keeping the unit ready is a full-time occupation.
We train continuously, not just on weekends. We run a flying operation here 4 to 5 days a week, and with the luxury of an airline schedule, many of our pilots can come in and fly several times a week if they wish, and we can maintain the same level of proficiency.
In the past 2 years, many of these Maryland Guardsmen have twice left their families and full-time jobs to assist NATO forces in Bosnia. Despite the serious nature of their service, these hog pilots feel their affection for the Warthog helps them keep things in perspective.
I think we're a little bit more casual and not as threatened about our ego per se, but it's a single seat airplane, so you get to fly it by yourself. You don't have to talk to anybody else of what you're doing. We always fly in 2 or 4 aircraft, and we train routinely at low altitude, 500 feet, or you can go lower in certain areas. And that, moving around at 300 knots, that's a lot of fun.
Flying the Hawk has got to be as fun as any fighter to fly. It's single seat. It's a VFR mission, which means you don't have to fly on predetermined routes. You can navigate with much more freedom, and it's just a great deal of fun.
I think it's the most enjoyable type of tactical flying I could ever hope to do.
In January 1973, the Fairchild Republic Corporation unveiled the airplane the Air Force and the Army desperately wanted, the A-10 Thunderbolt II. It was not a pretty sight, but it was exactly what the military needed. The conflict in Vietnam had painfully illustrated the need for a new aircraft to handle the difficult task of close air support, a role the A-10 was methodically designed to perform. This task is one of the most difficult in all of aviation. The Warthog must loiter around the battlefield while providing support for ground forces and destroying enemy tanks, vehicles, and artillery. And this job must be performed at low altitudes, under heavy enemy fire.
That's why this airplane is so ugly. This airplane is optimized to perform the close air support mission. It's designed to fly slower than most. Slower because it's necessary to keep the good guys and the bad guys in sight if you're going to deliver ordnance in close proximity to those good guys.
The A-10 evolved from lessons learned in Vietnam, but it was in reality designed to provide close air support in Europe. The A-10, with its tank-killing ability, stood as an integral part of NATO's strategy to match the threat if Soviet tanks stood poised to storm across Germany. 40 years earlier, the Germans had unleashed upon the world the power of close air support. By the summer of 1939, Germany's resurrection into a military power was complete. The Nazi regime combined a huge, highly mechanized army with a devastating fleet of 4,000 all-metal aircraft. Hitler's Air Force, the Luftwaffe, pushed the envelope of war into a terrifying new era. The strategy behind the design of the Luftwaffe was close air-to-ground support, a strategy unveiled with terrifying precision during the Nazis' invasion of Poland. In a pattern destined to be repeated throughout Europe, the Luftwaffe soared ahead of Hitler's highly mechanized army and pounded enemy troops, artillery, and aircraft. Within 10 months, Europe had collapsed into the iron fist of the Nazis, a testament to the brutal effectiveness of their military machine. In the wake of the German victories and the emerging threat from Japan, American airplane manufacturers began designing and manufacturing airplanes at an extraordinary rate. Of all the American fighters from World War II, one simply stands alone: Republic's P-47 Thunderbolt. More than 15,600 P-47s were manufactured, more than any other Allied fighter from World War II. Nicknamed the Jug, the Thunderbolt was the largest of all the Allied single-engine fighters and weighed an astonishing 8 tons. Armed with 850 caliber machine guns, the Thunderbolt presented a formidable force. Driven by a 13-foot propeller and a 2,300 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, the P-47 was the fastest U.S. fighter and could reach speeds of 428 miles per hour. With a range of more than 1,000 miles and a cruising speed of 350 miles per hour, the P-47 starred throughout the war as an invaluable escort for bombers and as an integral support airplane for Allied ground forces. Along with planes like the North American P-51 Mustang, the P-47 provided vital Allied support for the Normandy invasion, repelling German troops and weaponry which defended the shores of France. Coordination of troop movements in sync with aerial support was crucial to the success of the Normandy invasion. On D-Day alone, more than 14,000 sorties were flown by the Allies in preparation and support of the initial invasion. The Allies learned the lesson of close air support quickly, and the legendary P-47 Thunderbolt helped bring the Allies victory in Europe and in the Pacific. After World War II, and in the wake of the tremendous success of the original Thunderbolt, the Republic Corporation began developing the lineage of jet airplanes which led to the Warthog. Republic's first F-84 Thunderjets were straight-wing jet airplanes which were armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, had a range of nearly 1,500 miles, and a maximum speed of 620 miles per hour. The first prototype flew in early 1946. These F-84s were the original Hogs, nicknamed as such because on hot days, the airplane would often struggle to get off the ground, and would sometimes tip over, leaving their stout noses rooted in the mud. Thus, the first Hog was born. All told, more than 3,300 of the original Hogs were built, serving throughout the 1950s and into the 60s. Republic continually upgraded the Hog, and in 1952, they produced a swept-wing version, known as the F-84F Thunderstreak. The legacy of the Hogs continued when pilots christened the Super Hog. The Super Hog, capable of a speed of 685 miles per hour and a range of 1,650 miles, soon developed into an integral member of the U.S. Air Force. It could carry a variety of rockets and bombs, and Republic built more than 2,700 Super Hogs. The F-105 Thunder Chief, introduced in 1956, demonstrated that Republic was not going to rest easy after the success of the F-84. And it did not take long for the F-105 to be given a Hog name of its own.
As the F-105 was introduced, the previous F-84 pilots who transitioned into the F-105 looked at their very sophisticated Cadillac airplane and thought of it as the Ultra Hog, and the 105 became known as the Ultra Hog.
Capable of speeds in excess of 1,200 miles per hour and a range of 2,000 miles, the Ultra Hog demonstrated the rapid evolution of the jet from an imperfect machine to a sleek vehicle with power, range, and firepower. Designed as a high-speed interceptor, this large fighter bomber was armed with a GE M61 Vulcan 20mm gun and could carry Sidewinder missiles. The Ultra Hog could also carry nuclear warheads in its bomb bay, and ultimately, nearly 900 F-105s were built. The final Hog in Republic's proud lineage evolved from the American experience in Vietnam. The war fought against a desperate and determined people in a climate brutally hostile to man and machine, pushed both to their limits. In the battlefields of the harsh, humid jungle, troop support was a foremost concern for the American military. Helicopters quickly proved their merit in this role, and the Huey paved the way for armed close air support. Although helicopters retained a mobility advantage over the fixed-wing aircraft, the firepower and speed offered by airplanes such as the A-10 Skyraider led many to believe a new fixed-wing aircraft was needed to fill the role of close air support.
The A-10 Skyraider really illustrated a need for a aircraft that was maneuverable, close to the ground, close to the bad guys, where you could look out the window and see what you were attacking to differentiate between the friendlies and the bad guys in a very reliable manner.
Fairchild Republic delivered the first production model of the A-10A to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in October of 1975. The suggestion that the plane be called the Warthog in honor of Republic's hog lineage, and given the ugliness of the airplane, did not sit well with the brass of the Air Force. The plane was officially named the A-10 Thunderbolt II in honor of the legendary performance of the original Thunderbolt in World War II. But to its pilots, and ultimately to anyone familiar with it, this airplane has only one name.
But it's a very affectionate name. No Warthog pilot is ashamed to call his airplane a Warthog.
The A-10 basically is a gun that they decided to make fly. It's a 30-millimeter, 7-barrel Gatling gun, shoots at 4,200 rounds per minute, and they bolted wings, a fuel tank, a pilot, some engines on it, and it goes out shooting at tanks and any other targets of opportunity. This is a 30-millimeter round. It's a training round. It's been polished to the presentation round, but this is the size of the actual round. Projectile is up here. You can see 30 millimeters is the width, the diameter of the projectile. And as you can see, it's quite a large round. It weighs about 1.5 pounds per round. And our planes carry 1,150 rounds of this. Give you some idea how long the gun system is. The gun barrels actually end here, and the gun barrels start about here. The gun rotor is in this area. Hydraulic drive mechanism, the two drive motors are here, and the ammunition drum starts about here and extends all the way back to here. As you can see, everything from the forward of the wing is devoted almost entirely to the gun system. The pilot's floorboards are actually the mounting surfaces on some of the gun structure, and with the exception of the electronic controls and the battery, almost everything is the gun.
When the Air Force drew up the specifications for the plane, they wanted the capability to kill tanks. Early on in the design process, Fairchild Republic decided a 30-millimeter Gatling gun would be the ideal weapon of choice. But the sheer size of the 20-foot GE GAU 8A Avenger cannon presented a design problem, for which there was only one solution: design the plane around the gun. The Avenger is a 7-barreled 30-millimeter cannon which delivers a frightening burst of destruction. The gun fires shells which are a foot long and weigh nearly 2 pounds. Fully loaded, the gun weighs 2 tons.
Well, the gun's a 30 millimeter. It's the largest gun, in an airplane. A fighter type airplane. There's some transports that carry bigger guns, but it's very precise.
Such precision allows hog pilots to hit targets up to 2 miles away, and with a muzzle velocity of 3,450 feet per second, the gun can fire an average of nearly 70 rounds per second. One shot can destroy a tank.
Projectile itself is exceedingly lethal. In its anti-armor form, the armor-piercing incendiary, a very small slug of depleted uranium is actually what's delivered on target. And it strikes the target with almost 12 times the kinetic energy of its predecessor 20-millimeter round. Even though it's only 50% larger in linear dimension, it has 12 times the kinetic energy on the target.
The tremendous recoil force of the gun led to its positioning slightly offset to port, so that the firing barrel is exactly on the center line. This avoids the problem of asymmetric recoil forces.
It produces as much recoil as the engines produce in forward thrust. Theoretically, if you had the ammunition and could hold the trigger down long enough, the airplane would come to a complete stop because the gun would win the tug-of-war.
The 19,000 pounds of recoil forces dictate that the Avenger is usually fired only in short bursts of about 2 seconds, an exercise which also avoids ammunition wastage and barrel overheating. Despite its incredible power, the gun is by no means the only threat the Warthog poses to enemy forces.
The A-10 is an attack airplane, and that's a euphemism for bomber. It does primarily drag bombs around the sky, although we tend to employ the gun whenever possible because the gun does give us the option of standing off from the target, sending ordnance a mile and a half downrange, and then actually departing the target area without having to overfly the target. However, the airplane can carry up to 16,000 pounds of releasable external stores. And that, I think you'll find if you check your history books, is about 4 times what a World War II B-17 could carry.
The A-10 carries its massive load of 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance on 8 underwing and 3 under-fuselage pylon stations. These 11 hardpoints allow the A-10 to be armed according to the task at hand.
This right here is a ECM 184 pod. It's an electronic jamming device. This is a Mark 82. This right here is a cluster bomb.
The variety of armaments available to the Warthog is extensive, including AGM-114 Hellfire anti-tank missiles, Sidewinder missiles, and a selection of both smart and dumb bombs.
Although we carry dumb bombs or unguided bombs, we have a state-of-the-art delivery system, what's called CCIP, constantly computed impact point. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to deliver stupid bombs or dumb bombs with great precision.
But the typical combat loadout of the airplane then would include the 30-millimeter cannon and almost 1,200 rounds of 30-millimeter ammunition, plus 6 bombs, an assortment of Maverick missiles, the air-to-air missile, which would carry the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile, which we carry for self-defense.
Armed to the teeth, few can challenge the firepower of the Warthog.
The airplane, has often been said, and more often as a form of criticism rather than praise, that this is the only airplane that the Air Force ever bought that was designed to take hits, not avoid hits. And it's quite true. The airplane was designed to take hits and absorb damage and survive.
Every aspect of the Warthog can be traced to the simple concept that the airplane had to survive its grueling mission.
And the A-10 was designed with several thousand pounds of titanium steel surrounding critical flight components, one of which, of course, is the pilot. And this was an intentional design decision on the part of the designers, wherein they were willing to sacrifice fuel or ordnance load in favor of survivability.
Reinforced with nearly 3,000 pounds of titanium armor plating, the Warthog can survive direct hits from armor-piercing and high-explosive projectiles up to 23 millimeters. 1,200 pounds of the titanium surrounds the cockpit, enveloping the pilot in what is commonly referred to as a titanium bathtub. This bathtub of 1.5-inch armor gives Hawk pilots added security as they undertake their dangerous missions. One of the features that gives the Warthog its undeniably unique profile is the placement of its engines. The A-10 had to have 2 engines for survivability. Fortunately, during the early stages of development, the designers found out that GE was working on turbofan engines for a new Navy anti-submarine aircraft. Turbofans had made inroads into civilian aircraft, but had not been much use in the military sphere. These engines held several advantages, which made them an excellent choice for the A-10. They offered high fuel efficiency, and they were less noisy than turbojets, and had a lower heat signature. Once the designers chose the type of engine, another issue arose: where to put them. The area under the wing was reserved for the heavy ordnance load. Eventually, the area near the back of the fuselage proved the best location, and placing the engines there also offered a number of advantages. It negated a potential yaw, decreased the probability that foreign objects might be sucked into the engines, and removed the engines from the major flow of the exhaust from the gun. The forward fuselage and wings also shield the engines from ground fire in the frontal section, and the vertical fins and rudder guard the engine's heat signature from the side, alleviating some of the aircraft's vulnerability to heat-seeking missiles. The Warthog's toughness is compounded by a number of structural and system redundancies. The dual redundancy of the hydraulic flight control systems is also backed up by a manual system. This enables Hawk pilots to fly and land even if hydraulic power is lost. The Warthog's extraordinarily high mission capability rate during the Gulf War directly resulted from a design dedicated to ensuring the plane could be serviced and operated from bases with limited facilities close to the battlefield. Many of the A-10's parts, including the engines, main landing gear, tails, and vertical stabilizers, are interchangeable left to right. Interchanging as well as cannibalizing parts between aircraft is a standard maintenance procedure, one used with much success during Desert Storm.
The shape of the airplane, the fact that it's battlefield repairable with very simple surfaces, was all built into the airplane because the designers realized this airplane's probably going to take a hit.
The mission of the Warthog is such that hits are inevitable, and there have been and will be instances when the pilot must abandon his hog to save himself.
Well, export superintendent here at the Maryland International Guard, and part of my job is to ensure that pilots can remain safe while flying, but also in case of an emergency they have to eject, that we supply them with survival gear to ensure their survivability on the ground. And part of that gear that we would pack in their kits is provided here on the board behind me on display. And a couple of those items, first, outside of a large kit, we have 2 small kits that are contained inside. And inside these small kits would be the items that we have shown on the wall. And let me point a couple of those out. Obviously, we have the mittens and socks, both of wool, used for wintertime warmth. Obviously not a problem now. Got your knife, which is one of your basic utensils in survival. And we have container to hold water. Water is one of your primary needs in a survival situation. And we do supply many packets of the flexible drinking water there with them. We do have food, but that is not as important as water. We also have, probably getting into the most regarding rescue, would be the flares, which we have the handheld launching flares. We have other flares here to direct rescue aircraft in to pick up that pilot. And as soon as that pilot would eject and hit the ground, his survival radio. Very important to talk to other aircraft in the air to let them know what his situation is, and also to talk to rescue to direct them to his location. Part of the A-10's mission is to fly low to the ground to get close air support to the troops there. So naturally, this is going to put them in harm's way, leave them open to gunfire, missiles, and so forth. So the A-10 pilot probably finds himself in more jeopardy than the fast flyers flying to much higher altitudes. It's important that these items be there. Now, it's something that a part of our training, or a lot of our time is spent in training the pilot for something he may never need. However, should he need it, he needs to know that it is there and it will work, and fortunately could save his life.
You know, we got the latest and greatest equipment that we can have out there, and it's constantly being upgraded. Most of ours are 78, 79 version models out here. And so that's a pretty good long time for an airplane to be in service. And it's constantly being modified, and it's got a lot of capability.
Unproven in battle, much of the Air Force brass did not think of the Warthog as an integral part of the post-Cold War strategy, until the winds of war swept across the deserts of Kuwait.
You know, the mission changed a few years ago. Before, we were looking at a high-threat scenario in Eastern Europe, and then with the change in the political climate.
Many doubted whether the Warthog could adapt to the new missions of the post-Cold War era. But the Warthog rose to the challenge, and during the Gulf War, served brilliantly in a variety of roles. Despite only flying 30% of the sorties, the A-10 was responsible for more than 50% of the confirmed bomb damage, and only 6 airplanes and 2 pilots were lost, a remarkable rate considering the danger of the missions. Given the heavy use of the airplane, it did not take long for the Iraqis to become all too familiar with the Warthog.
There was a quote from one captured Iraqi who said that it was the most feared airplane. I think largely because we spent a lot of time over the troops, over the Army. You know, where some of the other airplanes were attacking strategic targets, buildings and bridges. Maybe the troops didn't have as much exposure to those airplanes, but they saw the A-10, and they were never quite sure what target we were going to choose. So, you know, there's some concern on their parts, being down below, not knowing
We had
when and where it's coming.
We had 144 airplanes stationed over there, and it was 24 operations. We had 2 night squadrons and 5 squadrons on the day schedule, and we just totally saturated the air with A-10s, you know, 25 miles deep. So that's all they saw continuously. And if you could imagine sitting on the ground wondering if you're the next target, it was a big psychological game that was.
And listening to the gun makes it a real, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it makes a great roar, and it echoes, and you can hear it for quite a way. And having to listen to that hour after hour, day after day, I'm sure it took its toll on them. Since the Gulf, the major change to the A-10 has been night vision goggles. They've redone all of our instrument panels and the consoles to make it night vision compatible. So now pretty much we do everything we did in the Gulf at day at night now, which is pretty much double the capabilities of the airplane.
With the A-10's role in the Air Force cemented well into the 21st century, the Air Force and the Air National Guard will continue to keep the Warthog combat ready, demonstrating a successful adaptation by the military in a changing era. Units such as the 175th Fighter Group must remain ready to take the Warthog wherever it may be needed, and must be ready to serve side by side with the active duty units. So far, they've done so without exception.
We have, in recent months, undertaken the same tasking that our active duty squadrons have undertaken. We have been to the European theater to support the operation in Bosnia, over Bosnia. We had guard units deployed to the Persian Gulf and performed admirably. I mean, there was little to no difference between, I must brag to some extent. There was no difference between their performance and the performance of the active duty units there.
Once deemed too slow, too simple, and too ugly to be of much value, the A-10 Thunderbolt II now stands as one of the world's undeniable great planes. Its outstanding maneuverability, deadly firepower, and legendary toughness are testaments to a successful design concept. The pride and affection felt by Hawk pilots and crewmen for their airplane, unrivaled. For these soldiers, it was merely a matter of time before the world recognized the greatness of the extraordinary airplane with the unforgettable name.
The P-47 Thunderbolt earned its reputation as a rugged workhorse of the United States Army Air Force in World War II, striking down close to 4,000 enemy aircraft on more than 700,000 sorties. The success of this aircraft would solidify the status of Republic Aviation as a leader in aircraft manufacture and design, and ignite the career of its chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli. Kartveli, whose genius helped create the P-47, would shape a generation of ever more advanced aircraft, from the F-84 Thunderjet to the F-105 Thunderchief to the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Dr. Robert Sanator, a protege of Kartveli, was witness to this golden age at Republic as he worked his way up from designer to company president. In an exclusive interview, Dr. Sanator pays homage to the legacy of Alexander Kartveli and the aircraft he conceived for Republic.
It starts out as something that you've trained for all your life, trying to make a difference. The cool thing is, as an A-10 pilot, on times when the stars align and you're up on that mission, where you get to make a difference, you get to see the reward.
It's a pretty easy answer to in terms of why are we here.
Number one priority is always saving guys on the ground.
The people that we so closely work with, the guy on the ground. That's my whole soul and being, is that guy on the ground. You know, he could be an 18-year-old guy, 18-year-old kid with a rifle. That's all he's got, and I'm here to protect him.
Sanitized dog tags, ID card in the left breast pocket, ENE kit, watch tape, smart package, like guides, maps, DTTs, RMMs. Let's see, vitamin pillow packs, water, snacks, seat cushion if you guys want to take that. Cell phones, you got one if you have yours. Okay, signed up. Yep.
One random Friday, spring of '03, so right after the Iraqi invasion, 3 guys in flight suits walked into the bar on campus and started talking about flying. And I was a year away from graduating, not really knowing what I wanted to do in life. And this guy started talking about flying fighters and being a fighter pilot, being in the Air Force, and how awesome it was. And it kind of hit a nerve with me, if you will.
Jet. All right,
How I got interested in the A-10, I can still remember it to this day. I was at a hobby store because I, like a lot of kids interested in aviation, I built a lot of airplane models. And this was 1979. I was in high school and went to the hobby store, and they had a Revell model of the for then brand new A-10. It had only been operational for a couple of years at that point. And I just saw it, and I can still remember to this day looking at the wall of models and just trying to pick what I was going to build next. And I saw the box and the picture, and I was like, what in the world is that?
During about the last month of pilot training is where you put in for what airplanes you want to fly. And I was torn on the F-15E or the A-10, on which one I wanted to put number 1 on my list, you know. So luckily, one of the respected IPs in our flight had flown both the A-10 and the F-15E. And all he said to me was, Mitchell, what patch do I wear on my shoulder on Fridays? And the patch he always had on was the A-10. So I ended up putting the A-10 as number 1. And I loved the mission, the thought of the mission at the time. And now looking back on it, I clearly made the best choice of my life on picking to go to the A-10. And then, of course, I was blessed and fortunate to get picked up by the Air Force to fly the A-10. So that's how I am right here.
I was a first lieutenant. I was 26 years old when Desert Storm kicked off.
The 26-year-old fighter pilot caught the nation's attention a few months ago when he and a partner shot down a record number of Iraqi tanks.
You just never forget when you look down and realize that somebody's trying to shoot you down, and you've got to kill him first.
My first full 2 years in the Air Force, it was pretty much a completely Cold War type of mentality. Our training was all very low altitude. It doesn't seem that long ago to me, but I know talking to a lot of the guys now, you know, it's been quite a while ago, and when you look at the airplane from then to now, it's pretty amazing the different upgrades and that we've gone through since then.
The A-10 is the only airframe ever that was built entirely for this mission.
Yo, come on, man. They're about to do a gun run. You need to get down. Let's go, buddy. Come on, man. A-10 saving the day again, baby.
There's just nothing that matches the devastation that gun can bring.
Hawk 6-4 is cleared hot. 30 mil inbound!
It's an awesome testament to the aircraft, I think, that the same gun that we used to kill main battle tanks in 1991 is the same gun where we can shoot a single insurgent that's fleeing on a motorcycle or shooting at our guys from a tree line.
Point is, you know, the A-10 was built for ground combat, okay? Ground combat we had the old linear battlefield type where we're gonna go fight a bunch of tanks going low at 100 feet, and then we've morphed into a medium altitude precision strike platform because the airplane has been updated and modified to be able to do that. Sensors are great, they're amazing, they enable precision strike, they enable us to generate coordinates that are pristine, that are right on the target, but that will never replace just, you know, looking right outside of my cockpit and looking at the battle space. What am I seeing out there, big picture?
We do have this personal connection with the people that we so closely work with, the guy on the ground. We hear him getting scared.
Request immediate re-attack, same remarks, same restrictions, from last hits, north 75 meters.
We hear him getting excited.
Here we go, that's it. Good hit, good hit, good hit. Dash 2, I need you in the same remarks, same restrictions.
We hear the bullets flying. We hear him taking cover. We hear him breathing hard. And it becomes a very personal mission, especially when you start hearing about guys taking casualties down there. You take that hits very, very close to home. Nobody ever wants to hear that.
We care about guys on the ground. We do our mission in relationship to guys on the ground. We are a support element essentially for the Army. We care about the guy on the ground. I'm not saying air interdiction mission isn't caring about the guy on the ground, but it's not tangible. You can't really grab the benefits of it right then. You're gonna wait a certain amount of time to see its effects. Air to air, how's that about the guy on the ground? Well, you're building air superiority, air supremacy, correct. But is the guy on the ground gonna see it, get the tangible benefits of it? No. Close air support is about the guy on the ground. Combat search and rescue is about the guy on the ground. We're joint. We're a joint airframe and an air force, and that's what makes us different.
Okay, today we're going down to Sande Sufla. We've been there recently, so we've got a good lay of the land. Keep in mind, Espandi's been pretty hot recently, and they've had some contact from the same area around Sande Sufla. He went over the recent activity. Keep in mind the kind of MO we've had recently out of there. They've seen the Taliban commander kind of looking at the objective first, doing a quick meeting, picking up weapons en route. Usually there's motorcycles involved. You've also got the Taliban commander that they seeked a couple weeks ago. So you've got all that stuff going on right there in Espandi. We're going right into the heat of that. So keep that in mind as we get down there. Keep your eyes open and stay vigilant. All right, so our actions on contact, near and far ambush, return fire. Look to me, we'll either maneuver or we'll push through. IED, get 360-degree security and clear the danger area, and then we'll look to CASEVAC. In the case of a complex attack, we're gonna return fire, move out of the kill zone. Indirect fire, get down, look for distance and direction from me. Our actions on halts, take a knee, face out, and the march intervals that we're gonna use are gonna be dependent on where we are. In the open area, spread out as much as you can. The bigger we can look and the more intimidated we can look, the less likely we're gonna take contact as we move down there. That's all I've got. What are your questions?
All right, we're kidding up 0615. 0615, kids on.
Shit, just say anything about Eric.
Yesterday, as most days, we went out on a dismounted patrol south of our fob to a village of Espandi. Basically, we got some intel that some bad guys were storing weapons in a building, and we had contacted them before. We'd run into them before. So we went down there to kind of check back up. And as we got down into the village, we ran into some sketchy guys.
It just, everything felt weird from the time we got down there. There was high tension. You could tell by the ANA's body language. He was antsy, pacing back and forth. Second that happened, we spread out, let the PL do his link up. It was just high tension. I felt from the get-go.
Hey, let's go. Go push.
نفر که بعد نیست اون نفر اگه طرفی پیدا
کیافتی یعنی کیافتی خدمتی
He said everybody is teachers here, so we are good people.
Okay, if they're good people, they have nothing to worry about. We're not going
to
take them in.
Just a lot of sketchy reports. No one had the same story. Everyone, they were all family. They all lived in the same compound, but no one's story matched up.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to detain them. So as we started to RTB to head back to the base, we got word that the Taliban were maneuvering on us from the south.
Again, 92A, be advised right now we're picking up and moving back through Espandi towards Ghazni. Mutant energy, go. So, that way. And Hog, if I could get you overhead of our lead element through Espandi, if at all possible.
As we were headed back to the base, we had to cross about 2 kilometers of open desert.
We were definitely in a huge open danger area.
We got about 500 meters outside of the village and started taking some pretty accurate fire.
That white building! 2427, send it. Oh, can I fucking hang it? Hang it! Hang it! I hanged it. Hey, shoot it! You ready to fire? Shoot it!
There was no cover. I mean, there were people trying to find tire tracks to hide, to get a little bit of a defilade behind. You know, in that position, the best you can do is spread out, gain fire superiority, you know, and then wait for some air support. Our comms were a bit of an issue at the time, and so they had a little bit of a struggle, but they did have A-10s luckily being pushed down to us.
I have your position south of the tree line.
We quickly responded, and working with the JFO on the ground and one of my JTACs, were able to get Hog on station quite quickly.
We were taking some harassing fire at that point.
Right here. Hey man, I know you're busy, but I need full security, brother. Who's shooting? Somebody's fucking shooting at us still.
But luckily we had the A-10s on station to come in and do a nice show of force, which is always a clincher for the enemy because they know what that entails.
The A-10 has proven itself time and again as being really a nightmare to the enemy. Just its mere presence alone is enough to keep the enemy at bay. And in that situation right there, again, just bringing those guys in quick and fast was enough to push the enemy away from our forces.
The ground troops that I work with, when they think close air support, they think A-10s. And I think the reason for that is they almost share the same mentality. If you were to say that there's a grunt in the sky, it'd be a hog pilot.
They're very user-friendly. I mean, any one of these dudes could pick up the radio if I get shot in the face and, you know, employ. Those guys are really professional, very well trained, and if, you know, you have a random Joe who doesn't know what to do, those guys can pull it from them.
To win a war, you need boots on the ground, and to have boots on the ground, you need support. And you need the right kind of support to have boots on the ground, and it's the A-10, honestly. Even sometimes just a sound, or just telling the ground commander, hey, A-10's on its way, or we have aircraft support in the 305 mics, and you ask what it is, you say, hey, we got an A-10 coming on. Yeah, it picks them up a little bit.
That sound is so distinguishable. Literally shakes the ground. It is amazing. You hear it first when it fires, and then you hear it echo from the gun in the sky. That sound right there just drives 11 Bravos nuts. It's amazing.
Hey, thanks, sir. I just shit my pants.
It's that sound of corny like freedom, but it really is. It's a sound of don't mess with me. It scares off everyone and shows you're in good hands.
I think when people 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road look back on it, I think people will look at this airframe and it will always be known as an airframe that was, some people view it as ugly. Who'd want to fly that thing? But you know what? It was an airframe that got the job done. It got bombs on target when it mattered most, and guys went home to their wives and kids because of the airframe.
It makes it, it's very humbling. It's that we are so trusted and liked by the ground forces. I think that's something that I'm very, very proud of. They love this airplane, and they trust us is the biggest thing. I mean, when you're shooting last night, we just looked at it, was between 65 and 100 meters away from the friendly guys, and for those guys to trust us to do that on a regular basis is very gratifying.
I got the greatest job in the world, man. I get to fly fighters when people need me to do my job. I have the chance to save lives and make a difference on the battlefield. That is when you hear the machine guns going off in the background, when JTAC's screaming, the bullets are hitting his feet. and you can hear the bullets pinging off the Humvee that he's hiding behind. And then all of a sudden you roll in, put some rounds down and take care of his problem for him. And then, you can hear the relief in his voice. That is the most rewarding and fulfilling thing that I can think of.
You've got a huge group of experts in what they do with a singular focus. And you can't really get that back once it's broken out.
The P-47 Thunderbolt earned its reputation as a rugged workhorse of the United States Army Air Force in World War II, striking down close to 4,000 enemy aircraft on more than 700,000 sorties. The success of this aircraft would solidify the status of Republic Aviation as a leader in aircraft manufacture and design, and ignite the career of its chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli. Kartveli, whose genius helped create the P-47, would shape a generation of ever more advanced aircraft, from the F-84 Thunderjet to the F-105 Thunderchief to the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Dr. Robert Sanator, a protege of Kartveli, was witness to this golden age at Republic as he worked his way up from designer to company president. In an exclusive interview, Dr. Sanator pays homage to the legacy of Alexander Kartveli and the aircraft he conceived for Republic.
My first job at Republic Aviation, 1951, was as a junior engineer, which is an entry position for young engineering graduates.
And what responsibilities did you have?
Very little. Mostly it was working under the supervision of others, and I began my career in the aerodynamics department. Republic was a great place to be. It was staffed with incredibly smart, in fact, brilliant people in all aspects of the running of the business. It was led by strong people who gathered around them the best it was in America. And I learned a lot. I learned everything from the people I worked with over the years. I should say this, that at the time period of when I started there, it was filled with opportunity. It is different than today. There were many aviation companies in existence, and each of them had many projects. When I went to Republic in 1951, there were 6 active aircraft programs in being. So a person had the opportunity to learn a lot about the different airplanes, to participate, and to really do engineering or whatever kind of work you wanted to do. There were many, many opportunities. I worked on every one of those airplanes in the first year that I was there, from the XF-91 to the straight-wing F-84s, to the F-105, to the XF-103, and the swept-wing versions of the F-84. I count them as about 6 programs that were moving simultaneously. There is no such thing that I know of today, and there certainly aren't very many aircraft companies around in the U.S. today. So in my own case, within being there about 6 months, I was asked to, of all things, to go and get some wind tunnel testing done down at what was then NACA, is now NASA in Langley Field, in their 7 by 10 foot tunnel of what became the XF-84H, which was a turboprop F-84. And there were some things that we needed to learn about how to fly that airplane, so to get its aerodynamic characteristics. And I was given that opportunity to work with the NASA NACA engineers, do the testing, collect all the data, and analyze what kind of flying qualities this machine would have. Major D. Seversky, as many people know, was a Russian. He was a pilot, and he flew combat work in the First World War. He was involved in, I think, an explosion of some kind in the airplane, and lost his leg. Nevertheless, even with his wooden leg, D. Seversky still proved to his superiors that he was a combat pilot. So I think that tells you something about an individual. And so I admired that in him. After the war, he started work with, I think, the SEV-3, which was an amphibian airplane. That was the forerunner of all of the Seversky airplanes that later became Republic airplanes, the P-35, the P-43, and ultimately the Thunderbolt, the P-47. Seversky was out of that picture. That was Kartveli. Kartveli started to work with Major D. Seversky sometime in the late 1920s. But of course, the company was formed in 1931, the Seversky, and Alexander Kartveli became the chief engineer and stayed with them. In 1939, the company became Republic Aviation. Major D. Seversky was taken out of his position because of financial problems. And we moved on from there with the different derivatives, those airplanes up to the Thunderbolt, P-47, which was led, that one and many other aircraft, by Alexander Kartveli. What I can tell you about Mr. Kartveli is that he had a very good technical background. So he was a good mathematician, and yet a lot of it was feel. And it is, after all, engineering is an art. It is not a science. It is, at least I was trained in that concept, it is an art. If you stick only to the books and the numbers, you may not succeed. You need to have a feel for things. And he did. But he relied on the best information he could get from his supporting team to use that feel to make it work. Some of the things I remember hearing about from Mr. Kartveli were when the P-47 was put into service, it was clearly much bigger than the kind of aircraft that were flying there, such as Spitfire. But it had certain characteristics that were very good. It had the ability to dive rapidly and to build up to very high speeds, so that if it got onto an enemy's tail and the enemy decided to dive, he would get very far, because the P-47 was good at that. At Republic, right after the Second World War, there were a couple of directions that were being laid down. One was trying to continue in the military aircraft field with the straight-wing F-84s. The other side of it was trying to compete in the commercial field. Two aircraft designs were put forward, one called CB which was an interesting little airplane with a pusher prop and able to operate amphibiously. When I was teenage, there was a radio host named Arthur Godfrey, and he talked about the CB, which got my attention. And so I tried to find out what this was about, and it was designed to be built for the consumer market with the concept that many people would be returning from military flight and might want to fly these little airplanes. There was a target cost of about $3,500 per airplane, which today would sound to be incredulous. I think if their final price was about $6,000. The other airplane was called XF-12, which later became known as the Rainbow. And this was a beautiful design, a very, very streamlined airplane, 40 to 45 passenger airplane that the company was trying to offer to the Air Force. They then tried to sell it to the airlines, and there were some people who were interested in it. It never got bought. The orders for the that company thought, that Republic thought would be taken by Pan Am, TWA, others like that, did not materialize. So the project was dropped. On the military side, there was a great deal of activity on a whole family of F-84 aircraft, starting from the straight-wing F-84. At the same time, there was a XF-91 that used a lot of the components of the F-84, but put an inverse tapered wing of variable incidence. And the inverse tapered wing was designed in order to avoid what was called a saber dance, which was the F-100 Sabre having some problems with the tip stall. That airplane was one of the first aircraft to go supersonic, or transonic to supersonic at sea level. It was, I think, the first. The airplane never went into production because it did not have the range. At the same time, while these things were going on, the swept-wing F-84s, both the F-84F, the RF-84F, and other F-84 Thunderstreaks and Thunder Flash and everything with Thunder was in progress. And while I was doing wind tunnel work on the XF-84H at Langley Field, there were these projects that were moving along. At the same time, the F-105 went into production in the early 1950s. So the time period is, over a period of several years, there were a large number of things that grew out of the Thunderjet. It was amazing to me how from the P-47, the company under the direction of Alexander Cartelli was able to make such a rapid move into jet aircraft. Many projects very quickly after the end of the Second World War. And one thing that Mr. Cartelli always insisted on was low-drag, streamlined shapes. It had to be smooth, it had to look good, and his opinions were that if it looked good, it would work well. So they went from the Thunderbolt P-47 to a whole series of aircraft with the prefix Thunder, the XF-103. Now this was an extremely novel concept. It was an interceptor that would fly at speeds in excess of Mach number 3.5. And it was a single place with a chin inlet for hypersonic speeds. and it would take the turbojets that would convert to ramjets at high speed. Now that went to markup stage, and it had very, very thin wings, beautiful looking aircraft. One designer said those wings are meant for shaving because they were so razor sharp, right? And it was basically a Delta platform. And I think at the time it was in competition for the role of interceptor against the 102. But as the years went by, the program was canceled at Republic in 57 or 58, 1957, 1958. And what came out was something called A-11, which became SR-71, the Blackbirds. And so that took the role of the high altitude, high Mach number aircraft that the F-103 was moving toward. And of course, that was a black program. We never knew it existed, or at least I didn't. And it was well understood why the 103 never got legs. But I did wind tunnel work on the 103 in the early 50s, the usual aerodynamic characteristics and such. So that is the breadth and extent of a large number of things that grew out of the Thunder series. The F-105 was, as you guess, was initially started out to be a nuclear weapon carrier. And there was initially, in the early F-105s, a large bomb bay that was built into the airplane to carry what we used to refer to in our engineering language as a special store. A special store was a nuclear-tipped piece of ordnance. It was then determined somewhere along the line that this, of course, we never used it. Hope we never had to. And it was determined that really the F-105 would not be required to do its initial mission, which was carrying the nuclear store internally. So it then got converted into a ground attack airplane. And that large area that was in the bomb bay, which was called by many of our people the ballroom, because it was a big area, got utilized for other equipment. And the airplane went through a whole family of changes, from the initial A's to the B's to the D's to the F's and what ultimately F conversion into G's to Wild Weasel. And there were a total of 833 F-105s that were built by Republic. Superb design, great airplane. It got a reputation for requiring long runways because of relatively low power. But when the J-75s, particularly the -19 engine, became available, a lot of that disappeared. But it had still the reputation, and so got the moniker of Thud. But the Thud was a great airplane. I told you before about Potbelly's feeling about smoothness, slenderness, streamlined shapes, and it was true. Things worked, and Republic made some very fast airplanes. And I'll tell you two things. One, during the F-105 program, Richard Whitcomb of NACA had developed what he called transonic area rule. And the F-105 required, in order to satisfy the rule and make it go through the transonic speed zone more easily, what's known as a Coke bottle shape. Well, when Mr. Carvelli heard of that, he would have none of it. But he says, we are not putting Coke bottles on my F-105. But turned out that when he saw the test data, changed his mind and allowed the Coke bottling to take place, although not totally as much as Richard Whitcomb suggested, but enough to do what it had to do. So he was able to step back from his beliefs when the facts proved them. And I think that's very important when you work with people. Your next in line are allowed to be heard, and they're not afraid to be heard, and they know that if they're right, sooner or later, it will come to pass. I think the sad part of Republic's history was that the decision made by Secretary of Defense McNamara to not purchase the next planned set of F-105s, but to use the Navy's F-4. And I think around 63 or 64, around that time, was very unfortunate. It took a great company and put it on its knees. They went then in 1965 to be purchased by Fairchild, and fundamentally were supporting the F-105s in the field and doing subcontract work. And they lost a lot of their people, but they fortunately retained enough to win the A-10 and to give them another chance at that. The TFX competition, which became the F-111, we were in that. We're in that. We didn't win that. Possibly we didn't win that. Don't know why. Maybe the concept was that there were, the F-105 was going to phase out, and then what were we going to do? So there were those years that the company just hung on, and then was successful in getting another chance at the A-10.
I found that like many things in life, the object that wins the competition is not necessarily the best designed or the logical winner.
Mm-hmm.
There are other aspects of the competition. That
Yes.
Political being not the least of them.
Oh yes, and I think if we were to talk about what causes an airplane to succeed with its customers or potential customers as opposed not to, as you point out, there are many reasons, not necessarily which is the best design. And some of those reasons might be the ability or ability of management to actually pull the job off. That's an important assessment factor. And it may well be political. There are all these things that come into it. Our own belief at Republic during the F-15 program, and it's just our opinion. We don't know this to be a fact, but we had been told that we had a very good F-15 proposal for its design work, and I think the competition was running between Republic and General Dynamics. That's my recollection of that. And almost apparently out of nowhere, in the final phases of this, McDonnell Douglas entered. And they had a fine airplane, but so did we. And we believed at the time that the superior strength as perceived by the Air Force or the Pentagon of the McDonnell Douglas Corporation and its ability to manage the program was the reason that they were selected. The 8-9 A-10 were the two entries into the AX program, which was our first foray into a fly-off. Now, prototypes were built for fixed price. I think Republic charged something like $40 million, but used a lot more than that to field 2 prototype A-10s. And similarly, Northrop fielded 2 A-9s. The first flight of our A-10 was in 16 months. So from award of contract to the first flight of our first prototype was 16 months, which is what you even could do in 1970 if it's undocumented prototype work, not a lot of paper. So these 2 airplanes were flown first by company pilots and then turned over to a team from the Air Force to go through a whole procedure in flight and in other logistics analyses, the whole ball of wax, to determine which one would be the winner. That was a different approach than the things that were done in the days of the other Thunder aircraft. The 4 aircraft, 2 from each company, were flown at over a period of many months at Edwards Air Force Base.
Were you present?
Oh, yes.
And so, was this a nail-biting time?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, tell me about that.
Well, the first nail-biting time is after 16 months when our chief test pilot took the airplane off, right? Sam Nelson was the pilot, and he had done simulator work. I went with Sam to Moffett Field in California, where they had a large mobile simulator where we put the characteristics of our A-10 in there, and he got practice in flying the airplane by a simulator. Well, I took it off, and that was a gear down test. We did not collapse or retract the gear during that test, and seemed to behave the way, at least in those low-speed flights, the way we intended to. So that, I think, is the first nail-biter. First flights are like that,
Right. Will it fly?
Yeah. And we had an incident as the testing went on. We had 2 prototypes, right? And one of the young captains, fine man, always liked him, he landed one of our prototypes in a controlled crash. In other words, I think that he accepted the blame for judgment, and I think he blew out the tires, right? When you blow out the tires on an airplane, bad things happen, and you do some damage. But we had some really good engineers who went out and fixed that airplane, and it was back in the air in a matter of maybe weeks, see? I know that the young captain that flew it got out of the airplane and threw his helmet on the ground. He was so upset of what happened that put us at a potential disadvantage, But it's the kind of people that work for the Air Force, the kind of people that we had that let's just go fix it and go on from here. For a while, I was preliminary design manager, and I was responsible for leading our engineers and manufacturing people in design of our airplane. And it's pretty ugly. And Mr. Cartvelli, the biggest part about it that he really was unhappy with was the wing selection in terms of its thickness and camber. And that was selected in order to meet a low-speed maneuvering requirement, a sustained maneuvering requirement that about 150 knots. So Mr. Cartvelli, of course, had been working up in high Mach numbers. Speed was everything. So we had many debates, he and I, about thin wing, thick wing, and all that. We never really resolved it. However, when the contract was awarded to Republic over Northrop, hopefully that means we had a superior airplane in all things considered, and it met the requirements, but it was designed to meet the requirements. He came to me and he said, "Monsieur le Sénateur, you were right." I mean, I will never, ever forget that.
What would you say his legacy is, by any chance? What would you say?
Well, the legacy that Mr. Cartvelli would be responsible for is the entire family of aircraft, and it's substantial. Many different kinds of airplanes, developing from the technology of the 20s and the 30s right up until the 70s. And to a historian or someone who visits the museums and looks up the aircraft, his fingerprints are all over them. Republic's airplanes have been used in many different ways. Mr. Cartvelli's designs from the P-47 Thunderbolt and the Thunder series right up to Thunderbolt 2 have a linkage. And the linkage comes from all of the engineering talent that grew in that time period. People that worked on the AX or A-10 for us were there years before and learned about ground attack and close air support and how to design things. So one could see that the Thunderbolt 2 is generated out of a long history reaching back to the original Thunderbolt. From the aerodynamics work, which I did for 8-9 years, then more project work, working on the aerospace plane, on hypersonic vehicles, the F-15 project, which was our proposal, that was eventually gone to McDonnell Douglas. And of course, I was a principal on the AX competition, which pitted Northrop's A-9 against the Fairchild Republic A-10. And I spent a lot of time first as the chief technical engineer on that A-10 or AX, and then as a deputy program manager when it became a development and production, full-scale development, and went from there to senior vice president of the company dealing with technology and business administration, business development, sorry. And then was fortunate enough to be selected to become president. So that in a nutshell takes care of 35 years of involvement with Republic.
What are you most proud of?
I think the things that stay in my mind, the one thing that stays in my mind is the A-10 program, because that was bringing the company back from the grave. In 1970 dollars, it is a program that brought $5 billion, which is not much these days, but in 1970 it was a lot of money for a program that provided work, opportunity for development, and more chances to succeed. So that is the single most important impact on me and would be the most important memories I have. Summing up, I would say that the story of Republic Aviation is a great story, and that it covered the waterfront. It was a leader.
Aviation The art of aeronautics began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.